Hi, and welcome back to the cell. We are officially into our second lecture here on the cell, and we're going to start talking about the two different main types of cells we find here living among us right now. So what I have also done on the website is I provided this little worksheet here for you. I know you can't see it probably too well, but hopefully this image looks familiar once you download it. But what we're going to be talking today are the two main types of cells. One of them is prokaryotes, the other one is eukaryotes. And what I want you to do, if this is handy for you, to fill out this worksheet as we talk or after you watch this video and realize that, okay, we have similarities and differences. We're going to talk about each of those similarities and differences between prokaryotes and eukaryotes. So here you can list the differences, and here's a space for the similarities. There's also another image there that has just pictures of the different types of cells. This is your typical prokaryote, these are eukaryotes. We're going to talk about all that right now. So here we go. This is going to be Roman numeral 2 in our notes. This is going to be the types of cells. Types of cells. And the two types of cells we're going to talk about are prokaryote and eukaryote. So if someone says it's a prokaryotic cell, that means it's a prokaryote. So it's just a different way of saying the same thing. So prokaryotes, or prokaryotic cells, this classifies two different cells in this specific kingdom. So the kingdoms of bacteria and archaea. I'll make sure I spell this right because it's always funny for me, archaea. So bacteria and archaea, do you remember if you ever studied taxonomy or anything like this, it's kingdom, phylum, class, sort, or family, genus, species. Kingdom is bacteria and archaea kingdoms. And if you're looking at the domains between the two, you have the archaea and the bacteria domain as well. Everything else lives in the eukaryotic world. So when we talk about eukaryotic cells, eukaryotes, you're talking about us. You're talking about protists, which are those cute little single cellular organisms like amoebas, parameciums, stuff like that. Fungi, animals, us, and plants. So here you got protists, fungi, animals, and plants. These are the kingdoms, protists, fungi, animals, and plants, that are attributed to having eukaryotic cells. Okay? Now, bacteria, unfortunately we all know too much about bacteria. There's great bacteria. You have more bacterial cells in your body than you have human cells in your body. And that's probably good because they help keep things at a good balance in your body. Archaea, but there's also bad bacteria too, obviously. Archaea, these are specialized prokaryotic cells that live, the most famous of the archaea cells are those thermophile cells that live in at those like deep sea thermal vents deep in the ocean. The temperature is ridiculously hot. A normal prokaryotic cell couldn't handle that heat, but an archaea cell, a prokaryotic cell in the group of archaea can. There's also halophiles. These are other cells that like to live in high salt concentrations, and eukaryotic cells can't handle that either. So you can almost imagine these guys are a little bit more tougher, if you will, than these guys. But these are more specialized, and we could do a whole lot more stuff with these. These are technically more simple, but they're tough, and they have a lot of good stuff to go along with them as well. So we're going to talk about the differences and the similarities between prokaryotes and eukaryotes. So I'm just going to erase this part right here so I have some room on this first. Let's first talk about the similarities between prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Similarities, that's between prokaryotes and eukaryotes. The first main similarity that they have is that both types of cells are filled with what we call this semi-fluid called cytosol. It's almost like it would be equivalent to our blood, if you will. Like we're just filled with the liquids that are within our body. That's essentially the same thing. So both types of cells are filled with a semi-fluid called cytosol. Another word that we hear a lot in cellular biology is cytoplasm. Cytoplasm is not cytosol. Cytoplasm is the space inside of a cell. So you can imagine if you have an avocado and you take out the yummy fleshy part of the avocado, the fleshy part of the avocado would be the cytosol, the semi-fluid. Once you scrape out the avocado and you put the empty avocado back together, if you will, that space where the meat of the avocado was, that would be called the cytoplasm. So the cytoplasm is the space that the cytosol fills. Okay. The other similarity between prokaryotes and eukaryotes is that both types of cells contain chromosomes. And what chromosomes are, this is the genetic material within each cell. And in all cases, it's DNA. So remember back when we learned about nucleic acids and we had two types of nucleic acids, DNA and RNA? All living things have DNA as our genetic material. So both have chromosomes, which is the genetic material made of DNA. The word chromosome is literally the shape we attribute to the shape DNA takes inside the cell. So within humans, you may have seen pictures of chromosomes, and it's a typical X shape. That would be an X-shaped chromosome. In bacteria and prokaryotes, they have a different shape. They're more circular. So we're going to talk about that. So both have cytosol, both have chromosomes, they both have genetic material. Without genetic material, you're not dividing, you're not able to reproduce. And that's one of the qualities of life. You have to be able to reproduce. And lastly, both types of cells have a cell membrane, also called a plasma membrane. So if you ever hear cell membrane, plasma membrane, same thing. And in both cases, the cell membrane is made of exactly what we learned about the last couple sections. It's a phospholipid bilayer. So both have a cell membrane made of a phospholipid bilayer. And just in case, if you ever see anything different, if you see plasma membrane, same thing, okay? It just depends on, some textbooks like to say plasma membrane, some like to say cell membrane, they're exactly the same thing. All right, so those are the similarities. They both have cytosol, they both have chromosomes made of DNA, and they're all surrounded by a cell membrane that is made of a phospholipid bilayer. All right, so those are similarities. Let's do the differences. Here we go. Big B. The differences. And I'm going to actually make a list. So I'm going to do prokaryotes here. And I'll do eukaryotes here. And this is going to, learning the differences is actually going to help make sense of the naming of why we call these two different types of cells prokaryotes and eukaryotes. So the first main difference between prokaryotes and eukaryotes is that in prokaryotes, the DNA that is within each prokaryote, so you have DNA in every single cell of your body. At some point in that cell's life, there is DNA inside of the cell of the body. Some cells, like your red blood cells, don't keep the DNA in there anymore, but that's one exception out of all the billions of other cells in your body. Every cell in your body has all the DNA it needs to survive. And that's everything that you are made of, basically, to give you all the characteristics you see. So, for prokaryotes, their DNA it's packaged a little bit differently, and it's placed in a specialized part inside that cell. So for prokaryotes, it's concentrated, it's squished together, if you will, in a region called the nucleoid. So DNA is concentrated in a region called the nucleoid. It's a little bit different in eukaryotes, obviously, because we're in differences. In eukaryotes, the DNA is in a membrane-bound organelle. So here's what an organelle is, just to give you a quick background. Just like my body and your body have all these different organs, they do specific jobs in order for my body to live and thrive. Same thing inside every single cell in your body. They have these mini organs, if you will, that everybody does a different job in order to contribute to the greater good of the cell. Okay? So within the cell, you have these organelles, and in eukaryotes, they have all these organelles are surrounded by a membrane. And you guessed it, that membrane is also a phospholipid bilayer. It's a little bit different with this one that we're about to talk about, but stick with me. In eukaryotes, DNA is concentrated in a membrane-bound organelle, and that organelle is called the nucleus. You probably heard, oh, this is like nuclear, it's like the center of all things. That's kind of the same idea when we're talking about cell biology. So DNA is concentrated in a membrane-bound organelle called the nucleus. Okay, so this is a big deal. In eukaryotes, plants, animals, fungus, you name it, they have a nucleus. And that nucleus is actually visible under a light microscope. If you stain whatever you're looking at correctly, you can actually visualize the nucleus really, really well. If you take a toothpick and scrape a little bit of cheek cells, put it onto a glass slide, use a special dye to look at these cells and put it under a light microscope, you could see these little dots inside every single cell, and those tiny little dots is the nucleus. However, if you did the same thing to a prokaryote, you can't see it. It's the membrane that allows you to see what's going on here. Prokaryotes don't have a membrane-bound organelle. The DNA is literally just floating around in this region, and it's all tightly packed together, and that's the nucleoid. So back in the day, when they were figuring out all these different types of cells, they said, hang on, in eukaryotes, we see this tiny little circle inside the cell. But when you look at this guy, you don't see that little circle inside. So in typical Latin and Greek fashion, when we're naming things in biology, they called these guys eukaryotes. Karyot, the K-A-R-Y-O-T-E, that means kernel. So if you had that little circle inside of your cell, you were a eukaryote. It's a good kernel, basically. In a prokaryote, this was before the kernel. So you didn't have the kernel yet. And kind of on the time scale of cellular development, prokaryotes were here before eukaryotes, and that's exactly what that's referencing right there. So if you're ever wondering, I forgot what I'm studying, is bacteria prokaryote or eukaryote? Bacteria are old. They're very old, so they're before the kernel. They're before the nucleus. Therefore, they are prokaryote. Okay? All right, next difference between these two. It does, again, relate to the DNA. In prokaryotes, the DNA is circular. You get this beautiful double helix that turns into a circle. So DNA is circular. And you usually only have one circular chromosome inside a prokaryote. So it's just beautiful double helix. Imagine like a braided ring. That's what it would look like. In eukaryotes, the DNA is linear. and you usually have multiple chromosomes. You know the company 23andMe? The reason it's called 23andMe is because you get 23 chromosomes from your mom, 23 chromosomes from your dad, so you are a beautiful combination of 46 chromosomes. Now when you go to make a child, you're going to donate 23, your spouse will donate the other 23, and there's your baby again. So that's why it's called 23andMe. This is what you are giving away for your inheritance. So in eukaryotic land, DNA is linear, and the X shape, it is linear. That's why we do that. DNA is linear, and you have multiple chromosomes. Every organism has different numbers of chromosomes. We need 46. Some only need 6. If you're looking at a fruit fly, I believe they have 3, 6. I forgot which one, how they inherit it, but everybody's different. And that's what gives us our differentiality as well. And lastly, when it comes to the differences between prokaryotes and eukaryotes, this is actually, yeah, I'll keep it there. When it comes to prokaryotes and eukaryotes, this is a big one, and this is what classifies it really, really quickly besides the nucleus and the nucleoid difference, is in prokaryotes there are no membrane-bound organelles. No membrane-bound. No membrane-bound organelles. So the opposite holds true in eukaryotes. You have membrane-bound organelles. That is it for the similarities and the differences between prokaryotes and eukaryotes. All right, so when we get back, this next lecture that we're going to do, we're going to start getting into this last part right here. What are our studies of prokaryotes is kind of done. We're going to reference prokaryotes over time. We're going to stay in eukaryotic land because we're eukaryotes. Plants are eukaryotes. We have a beautiful relationship with bacteria sometimes, not all the time, but most of our focus is going to be here because this is where the life we can interact with and benefit from and give to is as we know it. So we're going to start talking about these membrane-bound organelles. What's the function of each one? How do they interact together? Do they interact together at all inside the cell? Some organs don't need to talk to each other. Some of them have to. So it's very similar. You're going to see on the cellular level how that relates to how your body communicates to one organ to another as well. So this orchestration of communication and function and structure, all of that stuff is going to be pretty cool. So come on back, we're going to talk about the organelles on the next lecture. See you soon.